I'd like to take this opportunity to call to order the special strategic initiatives meeting of Monday, June 13th, 2022, starting at 2 p.m. And just off the top, to clarify, some of us perhaps had in our calendar that today was a special council meeting. It is, in fact, an SIC meeting, and key difference being allowing, or the opportunity to allow for public engagement as part of this process, which is important. So with that said, I would like to ask Committee Member Carrier if he would read the Land Acknowledgement.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hall. For more than 15,000 years, the First Nations walked upon and cared for the lands we now call home. Anishinaabek, Haudenosaunee, and Ojibwe, and many others who were families, friends, and communities the way we are today. The town of Collingwood acknowledges the Lake Simcoe-Nottawasaga Treaty of 1818 and the relationship it establishes with the original inhabitants of Turtle Island. We acknowledge the reality of our shared history and the current contributions of Indigenous people within our community. We seek to continue empowering expressions of pride amongst all of our diverse stakeholders in this area. We seek to do better and to continue to recognize, learn, and grow in friendship and community, nation to nation.
Thank you. Before I ask that we adopt today's agenda and then proceed with our meeting, I just want to take a moment to offer the following. It's not custom at a committee meeting that we offer public announcements, but I think that this is appropriate. On Friday midday, the community became aware of the sad news that one of our fellow community members had been taken by the hands of another. Many of us are sad, outraged, angry, whether we knew this individual or not. Kay Kristen was a member of our community. She was a member of the Georgian Meadows community. She was a fellow realtor within the town and the region, and somebody who was well-loved and well-liked. She leaves behind a daughter, and I have no words that I can express on behalf of all of us to what she must be going through today. The reason I bring this forward is that tomorrow evening, members, colleagues of Kay will be gathering at Sunset Point at 9 o'clock for a vigil at the Inukshuk to both honor her memory, to come together in grieving and support, and also recognition of the ongoing issue as it relates to domestic violence. I offer my condolences, and for those who are able, if you are able to come to Sunset Point and show your support, I know it would be certainly appreciated. So again, tomorrow night at the Inukshuk around 9 p.m. The reason it has been selected tomorrow evening is that my understanding is that one of Kay's favorites was a full moon, and tomorrow night, in fact, is a full moon. Thank you. So with that said, I would like to ask for an adoption of the agenda. Could I have a mover and seconder, please? I have Acting Mayor, Deputy Mayor McLeod, Councillor Madigan. Any questions, comments on the agenda? Seeing none, all those in favor? And it's carried unanimously. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest specific to this meeting? Yes, please. Go ahead.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hall. It's not a pecuniary interest, but under the Code of Conduct, it's with respect to, oh my God, wrong agenda. 2 meetings today. Item 4.1, one of the properties listed as 10 Golfview Avenue, and I'm a resident on that street. So I would just be asking if you could sever that item out, and I won't participate on that matter. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Seeing no others, if something arises throughout the course of the meeting, we know what to do accordingly. That brings us to the focus of today's meeting, and that is Staff Report 4.1, and it is CAO 2022-09, the Interim Control Bylaw, number 2021-024 exemption requests, short-term exemption program intake number 1. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our CAO, who will introduce the appropriate staff member to walk us through this report. And before I do that, I would just note that we'll have our staff report. We will then open it up to the public for comment. And then we have 3 items in front of us as it relates to the report, and I intend to table them independent of one another. Okay. So with that said.
Thank you, Your Worship. And today we do thank Council for agreeing to this special meeting. The intention was to very much accelerate this decision so that members of the community can move forward in building this complete community. It will be Director Valentine who will walk you through the analysis. And very much we're happy that you're able to see all these properties together and the some impact on the water supply over the next 3 or 4 years, so you can make an educated decision, and we look forward to it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And with that said, welcome, Director Valentine. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon to the committee, staff, members of the public who may be in the gallery and those that are joining us virtually. I also have Community Planner Nathan Wukash here with us today, and Nathan certainly analyzed each of these requests in great detail and will be the individual who will be walking committee through the details of the staff report. But I do thank you for the opportunity to provide some introductory remarks and context. So this committee will certainly recall that the interim control bylaw, or ICBL, was automatically extended when the town received 3 appeals to the zoning bylaw amendment, which was one of the products recommended to us from the land use planning policy study that would allow us to fairly and transparently allocate municipal servicing capacity. So to continue to support economic development, the supply of housing, as well as the creation of a complete and healthy community, while the ICBL still does remain in effect, Council endorsed a short-term exemption program and also brought into effect the town servicing capacity allocation policy, or the SCAP, as we call it for short. This short-term exemption program is intended to extend into December of 2022 or until the resolution of the 3 appeals, whichever is the earliest. The program is also implemented within, as mentioned by CEO Skinner, an annual capacity limit, which would put a cap on the capacity commitments for 2022. And this is to ensure that municipal water is available throughout the time period that we anticipate will take for the plant upgrades to be completed. So as noted, the first intake of this short-term exemption program was between May 17th and the 27th, and it was indeed accelerated to facilitate minor development that's been waiting to proceed and unable to do so to this point under the ICBL. Council did choose a compressed review period with the decision points in June, today, as well as June's council meeting, in order to move quickly through this first intake and permit construction activity within that available servicing capacity envelope. And that's the subject of today's meeting, the consideration of the first intake of the exemption program. Before we go to Nathan, just a quick reminder that concurrently within the short-term exemption program, it also does allow council to consider exemptions for major development through implementation of the SCAP, and those are going to be brought forward in conjunction with their related planning approvals, and that is essentially going to help us relieve the backlog of planning items that accumulated in 2021 while the ICBL remained in effect for its first year. Just a note that the report you see today does not itemize those major development applications. Several will be coming forward to you in July and August. And they do have a separate pool of capacity where we are able to draw from for 2022. So with that, Mr. Chair, and with your concurrence, Community Planner Wukash is got a brief presentation to walk you through the content of the staff report.
Thank you, Director Valentine and Community Planner Wukash. Welcome, and we look forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hall, and good afternoon, committee. This staff report today summarizes the staff recommendations for those requests to facilitate minor development submitted in this first intake, as Director Valentine noted in her intro. That program was approved by Council on May 16th, 2022. And the report today is intended to be received by Council for a decision next Monday on the 20th of June, which is part of the acceleration of this program to further expedite these requests. So the town received 19 requests in total. Next slide, please. In this first intake. The majority of those were of a minor residential nature. So I won't go into great detail about them, but I will note that there were a variety of new dwellings on existing lots, 3 accessory residential units, and 4 specific exemptions relating to consent applications. And so as Director Valentine mentioned, there was a pool of capacity identified as part of the annual capacity for this year, 2022, of 100 SDUs that would be associated with applications of this type. And that 100 comes out of the total 430 SDU that have been allocated for this year, 2022. These 17 requests are essentially for minor amounts of capacity for each one amounting to no more than 1 SDU. So one request of note that we should discuss, and which is on the bottom of the slide, is for a number of existing lots and blocks in the registered Summit View subdivision, which is 51M 1170. The Summit View request noted that there are a total of 108 residential units remaining to be constructed on existing registered residential lots and blocks in the subdivision, and that represents 105 total SDU. But the application noted a preference to receiving an exemption for all of those SDU in this first intake, but acknowledged that if the town was unable to commit to all 105 SDU at this time, it requested that just phase 3A, which is 60 SDU, be allocated in the first intake, with the remaining phase 3B, the remaining 45 SDU, being allocated at a later date. So phase 3A is comprised of 21 single detached dwellings, 38 semi-detached, and 4 townhouse dwellings. And staff are recommending the latter approach of identifying 60 SDU for the Summit View subdivision at this time. So in total, all of the minor residential development exemptions would require approximately 76 SDU out of the total 100 SDU that have been reserved for minor development this year. And that would remain, so there'd be a remaining 22 SDU for the second intake in August. And we should note that for each of these requests, zoning compliance will be reviewed through the building permit application. And so through this report, staff do recommend granting these exemptions for minor residential development. Next slide, please. So as we noted on May 16th, Council passed a resolution that staff consider implementing a rule for properties that require no planning approvals and no additional water capacity, but simply building permits and changes of use to be automatically exempt, subject to an engineering report advising no water capacity required, if any, to the satisfaction of staff. So while staff were prepared to consider this rule as directed by Council, the one ICI change of use request received in this intake is more complex and merits further explanation to inform Council. So that request was for 71st Street, which was the former KFC property. The proposal is to change the use from a restaurant to a retail cannabis store. Retail store is a permitted use on the property in the C1 zone, and the proponent has provided water consumption information, which would place the proposed change of use in the automatic exemption category from that Council resolution on May 16th. However, the town has filed a formal objection to the AGCO, which is the regulatory provincial body for licensing such facilities for the cannabis retail store in this location due to proximity to the youth center in accordance with the town's municipal cannabis policy statement. So council has previously opted not to grant an exemption for this property on March 1st and May 16th of this year for reasons of prematurity. The proponent has advised that changes occurred to the AGCO retail store authorization process in November 2021 to require the store to be largely built before a retail store authorization inspection and authorization would be issued. The proponent notes that the AGCO will not issue the RSA at this location until the store is built and continue to seek an exemption in order to get a building permit for this property. So at this time, the resolution in this report does not contain 71st Street, and council may wish to obtain legal advice in camera before making a decision on this exemption application. And if council does consider granting an exemption for this property, an amendment to the motion in this report would be required, and there would be no impacts on capacity allocation, meaning there would be no change in water use or additional capacity required. Next slide, please. So this slide gives a brief summary of the tracking for this year, for the capacity for this year. You can see on the left-hand side, the minor development column, the numbers that I had described earlier, 100 minus 76 plus 2 equals the 22 remaining for this year. The major development category, as Director Valentine had mentioned, will be subject to further conversations with council later this summer. Next slide, please. So at the outset of the short-term exemption program, staff noted that there would be unique circumstances that would likely arise that have not been contemplated and would require special consideration. The final exemption request for 500 Hume Street represents one of those circumstances, as it doesn't fall cleanly within either the minor development change of use or the major development category requiring further planning approvals. In summary, the proposal is to change the use of and enlarge a building that has received site plan approval, but has not yet been constructed. This will require an application for amendment to an existing site plan control agreement. And of particular note, building permits have been issued for the foundations only of the remaining buildings on the site. The applicant has provided water consumption estimates that compares the approved office building to the proposed business type hotel use, indicating a reduction in proposed water use. However, as the building has not been yet constructed, the new business type hotel construction and another office building have not been included in the water consumption ledger and will require approximately 58 SDUs of water capacity allocation, the specifics of which need to be confirmed with Environmental Services Division. So the recommendation at this time for this property is deferral of the ICBL exemption application for 3 reasons. 1, to obtain legal advice to confirm if the details of the application and history would result in special circumstances or treatment under the ICBL. 2 would be submission and review of an amendment to the site plan agreement for the property. And the 3rd would be confirmation of the SDU total. So staff have met with the applicant this morning to work towards a resolution of the 3 outstanding matters, and the report can be amended this week if these matters are resolved prior to the council report deadline, or can be brought back to the July SIC meeting with further information. So should council wish to give consideration to this request today, the impact on the remaining capacity allocation limit for 2022 would be a further reduction of 58 SDUs being available for other major or minor developments, with 155 SDU total remaining from both of those buckets. So next slide, please. This final slide just gives a brief summary of each of the 3 categories of application that I've described in the presentation. And That concludes the presentation. So and we'd be happy to answer any questions if committee has any for us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Community Planner Wukosh and Director Valentine for the presentation. So before us, we have three things of consideration. One is that we're receiving the report. The second is that we are going to take a look at the 17 properties identified and then further look at 500 Hume Street. But before we open it for questions around the table, we will look to our Deputy Clerk and members of the public in attendance to see if anybody has a question or would like to provide comment directly to committee.
Thank you, Chair Hall. I believe there are some people in the audience wishing to speak tonight. So if the first person would like to come up to the podium and announce your name to the committee, and just make sure you're speaking into the mic.
Welcome, Mr. Powell. And Mr. Powell, just before you start, we're under agenda item number 4, and then we've got agenda item number 5, which is public delegations. So you're speaking obviously to the matter at hand, but for those who are watching perhaps at home, if something comes up after the fact and you'd still like to speak to the matter under public delegation, you'll have that opportunity as well. But Mr. Powell, the floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you. Mayor, members of council or committee. In January 6th of 2021, we wrote to council our concerns with respect to 80 Madeline Drive and 70. Was a matter that was before the Collingwood Committee of Adjustment, and there was a decision made there that we didn't agree with. But we put forward our points anyways. What isn't clear to me, when I see 80 Madeline come up, our organization puts up a red flag because there's a significant, it sits within the Silver Creek wetland, okay? And the issue that we see in that is that the actual dwelling that's in there is I suppose you could argue it's a cottage, but it has water supply right now. So what is and it's not clear in the documentation that I've seen, it's not clear to me whether that's a new dwelling being proposed for 80 Madeline with the old development, with the existing dwelling rather. I'm not sure what happens to it. There is a need, if it has to have a new water supply, you got to get across Town Line Creek. And that's an environmental impact. And that needs to be discussed and given some assurance that there's no issues. So that essentially is the question I raised to you. Is this a new development, a new housing development? Or is it just the existing one and they're asking for water supply? A town water supply rather than a well.
Perfect. Well, I think it's we understand the question, and I'll refer to staff in a moment. Just for clarity, we do recall the conversation and the correspondence, and it's the Blue Mountain Watershed Trust that was on behalf of. Is that correct? Just for public record.
Well, for public record, it was January 6, 2021.
Correct, but it was on behalf of the.
It was to Mrs. Dahl. Ms. Dahl. Okay, and it was.
But I'm just clarifying, it was on behalf of the Blue Mountain Watershed Trust?
Yes.
Perfect, okay. So to answer the question, though, I will just refer it to one of our two planners that is with us who would like to take that and provide an answer, please, if possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Powell.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hall. To answer a few of the questions raised by Mr. Powell, the proposal for 80 Madeline Drive is to remove the existing buildings on the site and to build a new single detached dwelling. The proponent right now is going through a bit of an unusual process where we are pre-consulting with them on the proposed development for the site because it does have quite a history. There was an OMB decision in the 2010-2012 timeframe that approved special official plan policies and zoning for this site, and also registered a development agreement on the site that does provide more specific parameters about the type of development that occurs on the site. There is about a 1.5 acre building envelope that was identified through that OMB proceeding. And so the town is having conversations with the proponent and will certainly be involving the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority on the review of any building proposals for this site, because they do have jurisdiction in the area and would provide the town with advice and review of environmental as well as shoreline analysis and other engineering and grading works that would be proposed in order to build the new dwelling unit on this site.
Go ahead.
The issue you have in that area is that there's it's in the provincially significant wetland, and that's also something that you asked for advice from the Haudenosaunee Conservation Authority. And what happens, the problem that we have with this is that Grey Sauble used a different method of calculating floodplain and floodplain and hazard lands than does Haudenosaunee Conservation Authority, and that should be resolved. That's something that I think that should be resolved through engineering or engineering and planning, because one uses a different level of lake high water level in Georgian Bay than does Haudenosaunee, and your official plan uses 178, which wasn't used by Grey Sauble Conservation Authority. So there was a whole bunch of issues that came up there when we were looking at it that should be resolved. And we'd be pleased to meet with you to discuss them if that's what it takes, but we'd just like to understand it.
Okay. No, I appreciate that, Mr. Powell. Again, if I could refer that to staff. And just before I do, Nathan, if I can just put you on hold, do you have a specific comment or question?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I will at this time declare a non-disqualifying conflict of interest on this matter, as I am a member of the Blue Mountain Watershed Trust Foundation.
Okay. Thank you, Councillor Doherty. Community Planner Wukosh, can you further comment, clarify?
Sure. Thank you, Acting Mayor Hull. We certainly do appreciate the feedback from the Blue Mountain Watershed Trust on development in this area, and we will certainly, we have also circulated to the MVCA on this pre-consultation application for the dwelling, and we'll certainly be having a meeting with the Grey Sauble Conservation Authority as well prior to providing any formal feedback to the proponent on this site. We've already identified that is one of our intentions. So just to be clear on the site too, the zoning that was approved by the OMB in 2012 does permit a single detached dwelling on the site without a holding symbol. So the zoning is in place and it does permit that dwelling. That was part of that settlement and hearing in 2012. So appreciate the feedback, and we will be having further conversation with the proponent on this site about what would be considered appropriate development, and certainly involving both conservation authorities in that conversation.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. For anyone who's perhaps maybe watching at home, the reason there's reference to Grey Sauble Conservation is the fact that the property is at the very far western border of the town of Collingwood, just off of Long Point Road. And the actual address, the 70 and the 80 that have been referenced, are at the easterly end of the specific street, Madeline Drive. So thank you. Did I see a card or comment coming?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to make a brief comment, having been the past CAO of Grey Sauble Conservation Authority, but certainly speaking from a town perspective with this comment today. Typically, when setting the levels that are appropriate for flooding, There will be a technical study done by appropriate hydrology engineers that is peer reviewed, and then those levels are set. And as you proceed around the various shorelines of Georgian Bay, one of the key things that does set the height at which dwellings, because conservation authorities are really there to protect people and property, despite many of the misconceptions that people have. That's their number one priority and is set out in their legislation. So each reach is calculated separately. So I think that Mr. Powell asks a good question, and we should ask it of the conservation authorities. Yet generally it is technically accepted that various reaches that have different prevailing waves considerations may have different heights even within the geographic boundaries of Collingwood. Thank you.
Sorry. Thank you, CEO Skinner. I will then call for a second time if there's anyone either online or within our gallery who would like to ask a question or provide comment.
Yeah, approach the podium. We don't have anyone online yet, but I'll call once Ken's completed there.
Perfect. Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Hale, so are we here to discuss Yankees Blue Jays or 500 Hume Street?
Well, I appreciate the candor, Acting Mayor Hull. My name's Ken Hale. I'm Vice President for Dunn Capital, and I first have to say it is very good to see all of your faces in person after 2 years. It has been a long 2 years. I have seen you. I'm not sure that you've seen me as much as I've seen you, so it's good to see everybody in person. I first would like to say thank you to staff for working with us over the last few years on a number of files. They've been great. I'd also like to thank them for, we received an exemption for a small infill two-house development severance over on 1662 Collins through the ICBL, so we thank them for that. I also am looking forward to working with them on 500 Hume Street over the next week, and hopefully we can provide them and work with them and answer their questions over the next week so we can bring a positive staff report to council and move that one forward. I just wanted to give a brief, and I'll keep it to hopefully 90 seconds and then be here if you have any questions. But this is a proposal on the Holiday Inn site. The Holiday Inn site was a site plan approved, and it has 3 building pads. Obviously, Holiday Inn is number 1, and there are 2 building pads that are actually built in the ground. Building permits for those 2 pads were received prior to the ICBL going into place on April 26th of 2021. The permits were for office buildings on those pads, and obviously since the last 2 years have happened, we've looked at putting a hotel on one of those 2 pads. We've provided architectural drawings. We are ready to go literally in the next 60 days to start construction on this project. Part of our application, recognizing that the building permits that we have are for office buildings, that we're going to a hotel, was we completed our engineering study, and our engineering study shows, I believe as Community Planner Lukash had pointed out, we're using considerably less water than what's. And our understanding of the process is that water allocation is made at the time of the issuance of building permit, which would have been before the ICBL. So we would like to suggest that we are actually going to be using less water than is currently allocated for the property. So we are working with staff, and I want to thank them for, as they've recognized the unique circumstances and understanding that it's a very short time frame between the May 27th and where we stand here today. And we look forward to working with them, and happy to answer any questions if you have them.
Thank you, Mr. Hale. We've got the 3 items in front of us, but while you're at the podium, I'll turn to committee. If there are any questions that are specific to 500 Hume, let's take them now while Mr. Hale's at the podium. Anyone with a specific? Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Mr. Hale. What would be the implications if this application were deferred and you were encouraged to apply for the second intake in August?
Thank you, Councilor Dory, through the
Go ahead.
chair. As you can probably appreciate, the building season's rather short. We already have a foundation in the ground. We'd like to stand still this year and get this thing enclosed, get the building enclosed. A deferral will impact our ability to get this to a point where we can get it enclosed in before winter and get this project moving forward. So there would be implications there from a timeline perspective.
Thank you.
I'm going to follow up on that question just for clarity. And I'm going to direct my question to staff. I believe in Community Planner Wukash's presentation, he referred that the matters being discussed today would go to council on June 20th, which is next Monday. So if the matter today, specific to 500 Hume, was deferred, would there be an opportunity on or before the 20th for perhaps that legal advice that would then put council in a position to make a decision? Please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I do believe that there's opportunity between today and the when this would come up at council to provide advice and work further with the proponent on some of the legal nuances within this this item.
Great. Thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. Any further questions specific to 500? Okay. Great. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to ask that we table to receive the first item, and then we'll open it up to discussion, and we'll continue to move our way through. So looking for a mover and a seconder for that staff report CAO 2022-09, interim control bylaw number 2021-024 exemption request, short-term exemption program intake number 1 be received. And could I have a mover and seconder? I've got Councillor Madigan, Councillor Jeffrey. And are there any questions or comments specific to receiving the report? Okay, seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in favor? And that is unanimous. Thank you. Second part, and again, I'll be looking for a mover and seconder, is that the lands identified below representing 17 of the exemption request be exempt from the provisions of the in-control bylaw number 2021-024 and added to the bylaw Schedule A for the purposes and uses outlined in this report for the total municipal servicing capacity commitment of an estimated 76 SDUs or single detached unit equivalents. And the subject properties, and one of them, thank you, Councillor Hamlin, you've identified as 10 Gulf View Drive. We will sever out. But the 17 include 111 Napier Street, 1 Nettleton Court, 10 Day Drive, 68 Georgian Manor Drive, 33 Glen Road, 7704 Poplar Side Road, 40 Georgian Manor Drive, 65 St. Vincent Street, 80 Madeline Drive, 9 Juniper Court, 132 Bartlett Boulevard, 9402 Beechwood Road, the Summit View subdivision, block 51M1170, lots 42 to 47, 181 to 195, blocks 236, 254, 294, and 295. And that should have been 236 inclusive to 254. 2 Spruce Street, 10 Gulfview Drive, as I mentioned, 142 6th Street, and finally, the duplex known as, or the 2 properties known as 6062 Collins Street. Could I have a mover and seconder for that? And I've got, sorry, go ahead.
May I make a request to sever 80 Madeline Drive?
Yep, certainly. Okay. So then, with that said, I'm going to ask for a mover and a seconder that we receive the 15 properties. Go ahead, Director Valentine.
My apologies, Mr. Chair. We just wanted to clarify from a staff perspective that you read out 65 Vincent Street. It is in fact 2 addresses, 65A and 65B. So that is inclusive of 2 properties, just for absolute clarity for committee's decision point.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Okay, so I've had two requests to have two properties severed out. So what I would request from the table is that if I could have a mover and seconder to put on the table the 15 properties identified minus 80 Madeline Drive and 10 Gulfview Drive, and then we'll deal with them separately. Councillor Madigan and Councillor Carrier. So specific to the 15 minus the 2, carry the 1, does anybody have any questions related to those properties? Go ahead, Councillor Carrier.
Yes, just requesting a recorded vote.
Are there any questions of clarification for staff or members in the audience? Okay, seeing none, I will then turn the chair to our Deputy Clerk, Dahl, and I would ask that you call for a recorded vote, please.
Thank you, Chair Hall. All those in favor,
Oh.
please raise your yes cards.
And my apologies, we did have the mover and seconder, correct? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, my apologies. Thank you.
And thank you, that's carried unanimous.
Okay, thank you. Just going down the list in order, so I'm going to ask, you've asked to have 80 Madeline Drive separated, Councillor Doherty, but you're not stepping away, you're just asking that it would be separated from the bulk, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And I would put forward, if I may, at this time, a motion to defer.
Okay, do you have a,
In staff consultation with two conservation authorities and the couple of the other issues that have been identified with the not issues, but questions outstanding.
okay, do you have a seconder for, to defer the matter? Councillor Carrier? Okay. And Deputy Clerk Dahl, you've got those, the mover and seconder? No questions on a deferral, so I'll call the question. Those who are in the affirmative of a deferral, raise your cards. Okay, and we have, sorry, is it, yeah, a unanimous deferral. And I apologize, I should have asked prior to the calling of question, but is it possible through you to the CAO that that be brought back at the same time on the 20th? Is that, or 7 days?
I would, to you,
Please.
Chair, I would certainly attempt to do so. I do note that the wave uprush and water considerations are under the regulatory authority of the Conservation Authority and not of Council. So adjustments to those requirements will be under the authority of those boards. And I can say we'll make an attempt, but not a commitment. If that works for you, we'll do our best.
Okay, thank you, and I apologize, I should have asked that question. And then bringing us back to the final property, which we have asked, Councillor Hamlin is leaving, and what have we got? 2:41 p.m. And I'll look for a mover and seconder specific to that property. I've got Councillor Jeffrey, Councillor Carrier, and I'll call the question. Those in the affirmative, and again, that's unanimous. Thank you. And we'll ask that Councillor Hamlin return to the chamber. Thank you. Left at 2:41, you may have still returned at 2:41, but we'll leave it up to those that are taking the minutes. So that brings us to the third part of item 4 on the agenda. And further that, a decision on the ICBL exemption application for the lands identified as 500 Hume Street be deferred pending A, legal advice, B, the submission and review of an application for an amendment to the site plan control agreement, and C, a confirmation of the estimated water consumption STUs requirements for the site. And could I get a mover and seconder specific to this third item? I've got Councillor Jeffrey and Councillor Doherty. And do we have any questions specific to 500 Hume? Councillor Carrier?
Thank you, Acting Mayor Hall. I'm actually prepared to approve the recommendation, not as presented, but just to approve the exemption, I should say, is I'd just like to clarify. So I will not be voting for the motion as presented. I do agree that the building permits were issued a long time ago, and I don't see the need to spend money on legal advice. I'm happy to get this development moving forward as quickly as possible. I'll ask for a recorded vote.
So so you're asking for a recorded vote, but are you actually tabling something at this very moment?
You've already asked for a mover and seconder on the motion as
But
as
you said you
read
were
it.
going to amend the motion, did you not?
I'll be voting against the motion, and hopefully then you'll ask for a second motion if it's defeated, and then I'll be asking that it be approved.
Okay, fair enough. Thanks for the clarification. I appreciate it. Councillor Jeffrey and then Councillor Doherty.
So thank you, Mr. Chair. So for clarification and to be clear, the timing won't change with this recommendation as long as staff are able to do their due diligence before council. The only thing that this may save is funds for legal advice, but I'm going to assume that we would be wanting staff to do that in any event before the council meeting to ensure of our footing at that time. So I think based on what staff recommended, there's no change in the timing, whether we vote to do it tonight or whether we vote on the next council meeting based on what staff have been able to confirm. And I'd just like that clarified, please.
If I could maybe point that to our CAO, and if you wish to refer it to one of your staff members or take it yourself.
Yes, please, to Director Valentine. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, CEO Skinner, to the councillor. So we will endeavor to work with the applicant to gather together the outstanding questions and information that are required should an amendment to staff's current recommendation of a deferral be brought forward before the next council meeting. That may not be possible. It does rely on other folks' schedules, etc. The alternative would be to bring it back to the July 4th SIC. So we are going to make every effort to meet the timelines as described by Councillor Jeffrey. But if not, the timeline would be July the 4th as the alternative.
I do. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as a follow-up, would there be anything prohibiting Councillor Carrier from bringing his suggestion to the staff report at the council meeting if staff have not had or not been able to bring back the answers to the questions that they've laid out here?
I'm going to probably say that he would have that opportunity, but we'll just double check, and I'm getting a nod, so it would appear that's the case, but please, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Hall. The SIC committee is a recommendation body to council, so if council chooses to bring forward a motion at the council meeting, they can do so. Yep.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Doherty, you had a... Go ahead.
Basically the same question, so
Okay,
I'm satisfied.
great, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, just to clarify through you, Chair. So we're getting this legal advice irrespective of what we vote on today. Is that what we're saying?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, I missed a portion of the question. Could you kindly repeat through the chair?
Oh, irrespective of the vote that happens in the next minute or so, we're going to get the legal advice regarding 500 Hume Street.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, it is our intention to provide the best advice we can prior to the confirmation of the decision at council. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, my comment is my inclination is to vote to defeat this deferral and just go ahead. But if we're getting the legal advice regardless, then I'm happy to hear it when the time comes.
On that specific question or note, can I just to clarify and for everyone's interest, legal has already been involved. So we are not, as a result of what we're doing here, going to them for an opinion. They have been engaged in the process.
Thank you. Through the chair, We have engaged our legal counsel. However, as Director Valentine mentioned, we had an additional conversation with the proponent earlier today, Mr. Hale and others from their company. And there are a couple of additional facts that we want to check out and have our legal advisor talk directly with Duncapper, their representative, to provide the best advice we can. So there are some nuances left in the recommendation to council.
Okay. So, okay. So I mean, there appears to be a will, but what we're really looking at is a 7-day opportunity to make sure some facts are addressed. Councillor Carrier, did you have a follow-up? Did I see your card or? Okay. Okay. And anyone else? Okay. So the question is on the table. I do have a mover and seconder. And so then I will call the question. Those in the affirmative for a deferral of 7 days.
Sorry, Chair Hall, I believe a recorded vote was called
My
on that.
apologies.
That's okay.
Thank you. So I'll turn it to you. Please go ahead.
You. All those in favor, please raise your yes cards. And all those opposed, please raise your no cards, and that's carried.
Okay, thank you. So that passes and will be back before us on the 20th, which is 7 days today. So, thank you. So that brings a conclusion to item 4 on the agenda. It now takes us to the last, and that is 5, which is public delegations. Is there anyone either in the gallery or online perhaps that would like to speak to matters today?
Thank you, Chair Hall. I'll just call for members that are participating remotely. If there's anyone wishing to speak at today's SIC meeting, if you could please press the raise your hand feature at the bottom of your screen. And it appears we don't have anyone remote wanting to participate either.
Okay, thank you. So with that, we then take us to number 6, and I'll look down my right-hand side to Councillor Jeffrey and call for an adjournment. All those in the affirmative. And at 2:50, we are adjourned. Thank you.